In today's video, we're going to take a look at the Dungeon and Caverns set from Army Painter. This is going to be an example of what you can do with it. Basically, it can be used for anything. You can use it for D&D, you can use it for Warhammer, any miniature game you want, war games, RPGs. This is the perfect stuff. Everything in this box is what you need to build a scenario, a battle scene, whatever you need it for. In this one, I'm building it for HeroClix, which is a miniature game based within the DC Marvel universe. There's also Turtles and Star Trek and Godzilla and King Kong, all kinds of combinations of stuff that just pulled together for a really fun game. So that's what I'm building, but like I say, all of this stuff in this video can be used for any of it. It's just general tips when using it. So let's pass over to, well, me, and take a look at how we built this board. So, as I say, I'm using this one for HeroClix, so you just want to measure out your squares. If you're using things like D&D, HeroClix, where you do need the squares, make sure to put them down first. So in this case, it's 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches square. So I'm just going to go over and mark this all over. This does mean I'm going to have to trim off some of the edges later on. If you don't need the squares, it's much easier. You can just skip this step. You can check below where to jump to, where we get to some of the more interesting parts where we start to texturize this thing. We had some tears and breaks and just make it look more ragged. You're going to want to go over all these boards, and you do get quite a few boards in this set, which is good. And as I say, just drive that pencil down as you're drawing the lines, just so it leaves a... You can go over with a scalpel or some kind of model knife, or in this set you do actually get a Stanley knife, so you can just go over with that. I just use a pencil here. It will run your pencil down, so make sure it's not a good one. Just do it nice and strong, nice deep lines. It just means you're going to keep those squares even once you've added the paint. Now we've got pretty much all of them done. It's going to move on to the, as I say, more interesting step. We're going to start to add some texture to these and make them look like concrete. So first things first, I want to try and fit them together. So just to see how the board will look once it's finished. And this is where I realized the problem of having not quite enough squares, or too few or too many, and then not really lining up and it not truly being modular. So I do go over this and just cut off the excess. As you can see on the edges, it just doesn't line up as well. So we do fix that in the next stage. But regardless, this step's important. Obviously, you do want to make sure you're checking as you go, just fitting parts loosely so you know what it's going to look like, so you don't make any mistakes. As I say, we just had a little too much here. So I'm just going to slice that down and make sure we've just got the squares we need instead of these half squares. Don't throw these parts away though, because we will use them to build some other fallen terrain and debris for just throwing around, scatter terrain, used for like blocking. Just it helps. It's stuff we're going to need anyway. So like I say, just hold on to these because they are ideal. You can even use them because we've also got the squares on them. And as I said, because we've done that first, if we now add them to a map, we can actually see some transition as you move around. But enough of that. Let's try this. I've never used a hot wire cutter of any kind. So there's just something very therapeutic about slowly cutting through the foam. It does add a nice smooth cut. So it's ideal for like the terrain and fallen like walls and stuff. So in this case, we're just going to use it to cut some bits up. Again, just do it freehand. Don't try and style it out. I think it's important it just looks kind of natural. And then I'm just going to pile some of these on top of each other, as I say, to build like fallen walls and just stuff for blocking so the map's not as open. As I mentioned, because we have already added the squares, we could potentially have this as transition, so they could still stand on this and move from one to the other, which I think is important if, depending on, the game you're playing. I do also have some rocks and trees and stuff that I've already built previously. I maybe throw some of them on as well. But let's stick with what we've got in the box. As I say, I've just put a few of these broken parts together just to build like a fallen wall, and I can use that to break up the map and add some places for our characters to hide. Next up, I do want to add one on top just to add some like 3D elevation to this. So the idea is this is going to be like a broken down house or shop. So then I'm going to just try out and see how this works with some sort of broken walls. Again, it's just trying before we commit anything. I'm not going to stick this down anyway, so I do want it to be modular. I could just move it around for each game. But again, it's just testing where things work, and then I add the characters on. Do the characters fit? In this case, we're actually losing a square, so I try it on the outside. And eventually I do just decide to give up that square for some blocking. So there's places for characters to hide, because with a map like this, the more foam you use, the less space you're going to have on the map, because obviously you need to take those foam parts and add them up to build some elevation. I am going to come back to this in a separate video, so if you do want to see that, make sure you are subscribed. And we're going to add some stores and shops and big buildings and other stuff just to add plenty more elevation and just really grow the map, because it's about the right size now, as HeroClix maps recently shortened. So I just want to build it up or have options just to switch stuff in and out. Again, here, just fit before you stick. Try it out, see where it fits nicely. Try and make it look sort of natural. It's going to be impossible to do, but as long as you're happy with it, just stick them so that it looks like they've sort of tumbled on each other. I do really like this PVA glue in the bottle, although later on, once it had dried, I tried to get some out and it exploded. And PVA glue went everywhere, so yeah. Not sure how much I like it anymore. But let's move on to my favorite step, and that is the texture. So we're just going to use some tinfoil here. You could probably apply it a little nicer than that, but you get the idea. You want to just make indents, you want to make scratches. Pick up anything you can find and just use it. I'm using the end of the Stanley knife here just to make some holes in the ground. Use the Stanley knife itself just to cut up some bits where the concrete is broken and there's been a fight. It just adds character, and when you go over it with all those dry brushes later on and washes, it's really going to bring it out and really look good. So make sure you spend some time doing this. Just do it to all of the boards. Try to break it up, maybe have some more damaged, some not so damaged, some with lots of like markings, maybe some with grass and mud and other stuff spread everywhere. Make them all different, because we are going to be moving them around, changing them around, so it's good to have a few options. Now with this one, I kind of want to make it very damaged, as some of the others aren't quite as bad, so I am just going to mark out sort of a massive crater. I'm going to try and dig it up with this Stanley knife, get up what I can, add in some wash and some dirt and some other stuff and make it look grimy. Maybe sprinkle some flock on at the end. Some grass if you don't know what that is, and this is like your first terrain video. But the idea is just to make it look as broken down and beaten up as possible here. If we don't like it, we can always use a different tile. I mean, that's the beauty of this. We can just try and test what we like. And as I say, I'm going to be getting more foam and building on this, so we'll have plenty of options anyway. So here's an example of our work. Now we just want to hit that with some PVA on top before we do any spraying. And we're just going to add some small stones, some really thin sand and other stuff, just so it looks sort of built up and rubble. So you want to try and hit the marks where there are indents. Obviously that concrete is going to broken up and come away. So it's ideal that we add the sand and rocks there. Just add as much as you want. Honestly, I think it's going to be fine. Again, you do get some sand in the box itself, so I'm going to sprinkle some of that finely over everything. And then you just want to head outside, shake it down. I do eventually just use the box lid, so I can sort of keep the bits that I don't use. But yeah, it's just testing it out. Like I say here, we go over and add some more PVA and just add on more rocks until you're happy. As they start to build up in the box, you can then just flip it over and just rub it on it. Just get as many rocks and dirt and grit and sand as you can on this. Once we spray it and start to, as I say, dry brush over it, it's going to start to look really good. So the more you can do now, the better it's going to look later. And now it is the spray stage. I've never really had a spray I can just put straight on. Normally I cover it in like Mod Rock or some kind of paper mache, but this is ideal. It goes straight on the foam, gives it that nice primer, and then we can just go over and paint onto this, which is, it's ideal. I wish I'd found this before. Probably should have looked for it, so that's kind of on me. But yeah, for this kind of project, it's ideal. As with everything else, you want to go over all the boards, just cover them in this so we are ready to paint. Obviously, leave them to dry for a while. I do quite a thick layer here, so I just get all those recesses. Because when we paint on top, we'll still have those really dark black recesses as we paint on the grey. Which is the next step. So we're going to take our big bottle of dungeon colour, just grey. Obviously there's highlights and then effects as well, so it's grey, light grey, and then white. So we're just going to build that up with a nice big brush and slowly add some colour to the project. It's hard to notice when you add the grey because I don't think there's that big of a difference between the grey and the black, but as you get to the white, you do really notice how it picks out those highlights, especially like I say, on the parts where we've dug up with the Stanley knife, it really ties these pieces together. So do make sure you go over and do all of the breaking up and tearing it apart and stuff, because it will pay off later. If you've got one with a ton of rocks on, I would hit it with some PVA. This is basically just PVA glue and water. Cover it, make sure it sets properly, because as you dry brush over it, you are gonna accidentally pick up some of those rocks and knock stuff loose. Don't worry about it, just cover it as much as you can, let it set, give it time, try not to rush it. And like I say, as you add those colors and build it up, it's gonna start to look great. If you've never done dry brushing before, just get some paint on your brush, basically dry the paint off almost. You've only got a very thin layer and you're just gonna go over your highlighted areas and just pick some of those out. It doesn't really matter if you hit some of the, like I'm doing here, hitting some of the pavement, because I do think it's just going to add to it as you go. As you add those colors on top, it's just going to break it up and make it look more natural. As I say, once you hit it with that white around some of these broken areas, it really does tie it together. This is probably my favorite part of rewatching this. And as you can see, it just looks more natural now. We've got all these different random colors. We've got darker patches, we've got lighter patches. Some of the areas have, like I say, we've torn up some of the rocks where I've maybe gone to it too quickly or too vigorously, but we will be covering that with mud and other effects later on. So if you've had the same, don't worry. Honestly, we can cover it up. We've got granite, we've got mud, we've got water if we really wanted to use it. We've got plenty to cover up. But just look at these effects. This is what I like. This is why I enjoy building these boards. Just seeing the end product, or almost the end product, starting from literally just foam. It's just a really cool process. As I say, we are going to have to cover that with some thick mud in this case, and I'm just going to spread this over all the boards. I'm going to hit some areas where, like I say, we've ripped stuff up, so that gives us a reason and some logic where to put it, because it can be difficult. You don't want to feel like it's manufactured. Just try and spread it over, do dots, cover the boards. Like I say, don't worry about it too much. The less you think about it, the better it's going to look. So try not to worry. We have covered some of the recesses in wash as well. So that's just really going to make them pop, especially with a highlight on top and some of that mud and other things around the edge. Like I say, we are going to hit it with some tufts. Again, just cover those areas where you've added mud and the broken down parts where plants might grow, or in this case, probably weeds and dead grass. But yeah, just spread it around. Again, just try and make it look natural, or unnatural in this case, I guess. And finally, I am going to hit some of this with flock or grass, just to make it, especially the area where we really dug up and covered in mud and gravel. I think that just needs something to break it up a little bit. It's very difficult to sort of dig in with a scalpel and make the crater, because obviously the foam is very thin. So yeah, I think some grass will really save that. It's just looking, yeah, it's looking a bit off. So I do cover that in grass. I do thankfully have a ton of stuff from The Walking Dead All Out War, which was a miniature game which was cancelled by Mantic Games, unfortunately. It's a really fun game if you ever get a chance to play it. But these are ideal for this kind of map. I am now going to sort of try and fit it together the best I can. Obviously it's modular, so we can just change it around as we see fit. But I do want to get some idea of how it's going to work before we play a game. Now, the bit on top where is going to be like a broken down shop, I am going to go over and paint the sides at some point. I should have probably just sprayed them when I did it, as all the sides could have been sprayed, but that's something I can tell you guys to do, which I forgot. I do go over and do it by the end. As you can see, a nice little zoom there to point it out. But basically, I've just painted up the excess bricks and stuff we've had. I've got some Warhammer towers that I'm going to throw on. And just any scatter terrain you've got from other games are ideal for this. If you do want to see how I built some of the other stuff, like the rocks and things, I have got another terrain video on the channel, which I will link up here. But for now, that is the game board. That is the state it's in. And that is going to be how it looks for my first battle report. If you want to see the HeroClix battle report, click up here somewhere. But let's pass back to me in the office. But that's the video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully there's a few tips you can pick up. Maybe there's some stuff you think you can bring over to your game. I am also going to use this for other things, so it's not just for HeroClix. I can use it for Dungeons and Dragons scenarios, maybe a little kill team Warhammer type thing. The possibilities are endless. That's all I've got for this episode though. If you do want to see more terrain stuff, more miniature games, tabletop war stuff, Make sure you subscribed. As I say, it's all I've got for this episode though, so I will catch you in the next one.